we'll start with you, Tony. Maybe you could tell us a bit about your project and walk the folks through your project.
Knox, thank you very much, and thanks to Six for having us here. Look forward to giving you a bit of an update on Trilogy. So let me start by just forward-looking statements and just highlighting that we'll be making forward-looking statements. First slide really just gives you an overview of Trilogy. And Trilogy is focused, as Knox said, on the Ambler Mining District. The Ambler Mining District is located in the great state of Alaska. Trilogy owns a 50% interest in that district. And I'll talk a little bit about our partnerships in that district. And what we're talking about in the Ambler Mining District is high-grade copper, zinc, gold, and silver. And we have two advanced projects, one that has a feasibility study that was prepared by Trilogy in 2020, and then Bornite, which is an advanced exploration project. So what I'll do in 10 minutes is give you a quick overview of a company. Ticker symbol is TMQ. We trade on New York and Toronto. And for more information on Trilogy, I encourage you to go to our website, trilogymetals.com, where we'll have a copy of this presentation. So with that, let me get started. A little bit about the capitalization of the company. We're very well capitalized, sitting in with about $11 million of corporate cash. In addition, we have a joint venture, and as I said, we own 50% of the district, and the joint venture itself is called Ambler Metals. It has $140 million in cash. So when we look at the see-through value, taking our share of that 140 plus the cash on hand against the current market cap of actually more around 330 million right now, we're looking at an enterprise value of $250 million. We've got some major shareholders. Electrum, Polson, and Baupost have been with us from the beginning. South 32 is our partner in the Ambler Mining District, owns 11% of the company as well. And we have other significant shareholders that have been with us from the start. And as I said, we're in a very good position in terms of capitalization and financial position. I mentioned partnerships. There's three of them: South 32, NANA, and the state of Alaska. And I'll just quickly walk through those. South 32 is our partner in the district. In essence, what South 32 has done is invested $145 million to earn a 50% interest in the district. In addition, they have funded an exploration program of $30 million, and they own 11% of the stock. So all told, they've invested about $200 million to earn their 50% interest. And they're very much focused not just on Arctic, but Bornite and the exploration potential in the district. And I'll speak to that as I go through the presentation. The second partnership is with NANA. NANA is a native corporation located in the northwest part of the state. NANA has a rich mining history. They represent the Northwest Arctic Borough, and that's where our projects are located. Having NANA support and having support of a Northwest Arctic Borough will be key to the success of developing the Arctic mine and the district as a whole. And we're very focused on working very closely with the communities, focusing on their subsistent hunting and fishing considerations as we look to the development of the infrastructure to open up the district. And I'll speak a little bit more about how NANA fits into the economics of the project later. In addition, we have a partnership with the state of Alaska through a development agency called ADA. ADA was involved in the development of the road and the port that allowed for the Red Dog mine to be built. By the way, NANA is a partner in the Red Dog mine with Teck, largest zinc mine in the world, located also in the northwest part of the state. So we're working with NANA on the same basis, where we're looking to develop a road that will be a private industrial use road only. This next slide shows you that road. The road is a missing link to effectively opening up a district, and things are moving along quite well. A permit was granted last year, which was the last federal permit required, and we're starting on the detailed engineering this year, where ADA and Ambler Metals are each funding a total of $35 million each, $70 million to cover the detailed engineering that's going to be conducted over the next 3 or 4 years. We expect to have more news on access to private right-of-ways and the budget for the current year, which is going to be released shortly in terms of that detailed engineering. So things are moving forward quite well. And the way the road will ultimately be developed is that be private industrial use then there'll be a toll road. It will be built and funded by ADA, with the Ambler Mining District basically being opened up, and companies like Ambler Metals and others that may develop mines in the future ultimately paying for that road through tolls. The remaining infrastructure is actually quite good. Dalton Highway, a 2-lane paved road that connects you to Fairbanks, where there's a railhead, and then in Anchorage there's a port that would allow shipment to many different markets in terms of concentrate. This is what the road is projected to look like in terms of going through the district. All of those red dots, squares, stars are potential targets in the district. Sun is privately owned, and Smucker is owned by Teck. Everything else in the district is part of the Ambler Mining District and owned jointly by South 32 and Trilogy Metals. I mentioned a feasibility study. This was produced last year, and what it shows is a 12-year mine life, and I'll speak to the ability to extend that mine life considerably. We used the same prices that we used in the price deck in the 2018 pre-feasibility study, and what we end up with is a $1.1 billion net after-tax NPV with a 27% IRR, 32-cent copper cost net of byproduct credits. If you look at this based on current spot prices, that NPV jumps to around $2.2 billion. The IRR goes to around 40%, and those cash costs become negative 24 cents. The number that I also like to focus on is the capital intensity ratio, and what that shows is the initial capital per ton of copper equivalent, and this is very low by any standards out there. We'd be producing 3 products: a copper concentrate, a zinc concentrate, precious metal con. This is very much a copper mine, but there are significant contributions from other metals. And if you look at this, the percentage of revenue right now, it's based on the base case scenario. If you look at it at actual spot prices, the gold and silver component would increase, zinc and lead would decrease, copper would be somewhat larger as well. So there's a number of opportunities that we have because of the other metals that are available through the concentrates that will be produced. When we look at the mine itself, we expect to start the permitting process this summer. That would hopefully put us in a position to make an investment decision towards the end of 23, early 24. We're looking at a permitting period of roughly 24 or 30 to 36 months. There's one federal permit required. It's 404 wetlands permit. The other major permits are state permits. We have no federal lands. We're primarily on state or borough or native land. And so the process will really be to kick off this permitting process later this summer, to put ourselves in a position to make an investment decision. While we're doing the permitting, we're also looking to advance the project itself through additional work in terms of the feasibility study that was done and additional technical work to advance the project. This is the district itself. It's over 172,000 hectares. You can see the Arctic and bornite deposits. So Arctic, I mentioned, it's 43.4 million tons, 4.2% copper. It's a great asset, as you can see from the feasibility study details. Bornite in and of itself is not a slouch either, 180 million tons, 1.5% copper equivalent when you put the inferred and indicated together. In addition, there's a number of satellite deposits that have historic resources. And coming up this year, we'll be spending $27 million in the field. We're going to be conducting 14,600 meters of drilling, 7,600 at Arctic, and then 7,000 at other targets. So we're really just beginning to scratch the surface of the exploration potential in the district. When you look at bornite, as I mentioned earlier, South 32 had spent $30 million in exploration. It was mostly focused on the bornite deposit. You can see that there's 60 million tons at roughly 3% copper equivalent. So what we also want to do is look at how bornite ties to the Arctic and other deposits in the district, and that's part of the additional work that we'll be doing there. And in addition to copper, bornite holds a sizable cobalt resource of 77 million pounds. In terms of how this deposit compares to other volcanic massive sulfides, you can see deposits, you can see Flin Flon, you can see Noranda that have had very long mine lives in those districts, 75 to 85 years. Hokuruku is another district that similarly has had significant development and production occurring over a long time period, and we believe the same to be the case for Arctic and bornite and the other deposits in the district. And looking forward in terms of upcoming catalysts, it will obviously be focused on the optimization of a feasibility study. The study work that was done by Trilogy is now being optimized by Ambler and moving the project forward in terms of next step. We're going to have a summer drill program, 14,600 meters, and that's part of a $27 million that's going to be spent. We also expect to commence the permitting on the Arctic project later this summer, and then we should have some announcements out shortly with respect to the road and the money that will be spent on the detailed engineering for the road this year, and additional focus on right-of-ways. So those are the main focuses. We didn't have a drill campaign last year because of COVID, so we're really excited to get back out in the field, and we expect to be on the ground in May through to September, possibly October. And with that, Knox, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Great summary. Obviously, lots going on with 14,000 meters of drilling coming and all that permitting process. So that's a great introduction. Meanwhile, I think our analyst from Cormark, Stefan Ioannou, is now online. Are you there, Stefan?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. You might, if you can turn it up a bit, that would be good.
Okay, how's that?
That's good. Okay, well, actually, and I'll manipulate the slides for you. So we'll go to the your first slide here.
Okay, great. I apologize for the technical difficulties on my end, but I just wanted to sort of talk about a general macro overview of copper. Obviously, we got 3 great copper stories on the lineup today, and sort of just wanted to sort of set the backstage as to why care about copper in the first place. And obviously it's the base metal of base metals, and there's a compelling theme emerging as well that adds to that with the sort of whole electrification, green energy dynamic that we see a lot in the news. So maybe just on my second slide there, Knox, just to sort of set the stage. And one of the things that obviously there's always bulls and bears, and one of the bearish arguments when it comes to copper is that, well, supply demand is interesting, but from the supply side, there have been a lot of new sort of large-scale marquee mines that have either come into production or are about to come into production, over the last few years, and that is definitely true. And on this slide, you see on the left-hand side some of the namesake mines that are quite topical right now. And as they're integrated into the current sort of copper world as we know it, they definitely tend to keep sort of that supply-demand narrative in balance over the near term. I'd say sort of through 2023 into 2024. But if you look on the right-hand side of that slide, the bar chart there, what really catches my attention is that as you get into that 2024, 2025 timeframe, and this current generation of new projects is integrated into the copper world as we know it, the next generation is actually quite far behind, and so you see an emerging supply deficit in that sort of medium to longer term outlook. And I think that's really where the sweet spot for copper is going forward, and very interesting when you start thinking about, marquee developers. If you go to the next slide there, Knox, one thing to keep in mind is the copper price itself. And, just to sort of set the stage, keep in mind that, not even talking developers, but just looking at current producers, if we see copper pricing drop below, call it $2.75 a pound, you get to a point where about 25% of the world's current production is no longer economic. And, big majors can tend to weather the storm for, months or quarters at a time. But, when we see prolonged periods of low copper pricing, even the majors start to run into problems like we saw, over a few years ago in, say, 2015, where I can remember every conference call, the only real question that was ever asked was, how long until you're bankrupt type of idea. And that's the producers. And if you go to the next stage, Knox, or next slide, Knox, slide number 4, when we look to beyond the current producers and even beyond that sort of current generation of new projects, look to the next generation beyond that. This is a list of some of the larger scale, copper projects that are out there. And it's a busy slide, but I think the only thing I really want to highlight here is that when you go through the numbers, a lot of them, if not all of them, need, copper pricing well north of $3 a pound just to incentivize development, generate, a meaningful IRR to actually get these projects off the ground. If you go to the next slide, Knox. So bottom line, something has to give, and I think it starts with the copper price itself. And again, this is a pretty cartoony supply-demand projection. This is total copper supply now too, so obviously bringing in things like recycled copper into the supply picture. But nevertheless, we can see demand far outweighing supply over the sort of medium to longer term. You go to the next slide there, Knox. So slide 6. And one interesting new dynamic in the copper world, in the base metals world period, is this whole electrification and EV narrative. And obviously, when we start talking about green energy, the first thing that comes to mind is your Tesla and electric cars. It's something that's sort of something that's very granular that we can all grasp and have seen and probably have been in one. And when we're talking the batteries in these electric cars, I mean, the predominant metals are things like lithium, nickel, and cobalt. But copper, don't underestimate copper as well, especially when it comes to the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support those batteries and electrical vehicle charging stations and everything else that goes with it. So, we have a current demand outlook where, sort of call it base load demand is increasing at anywhere from 2 to 4% per annum. And on top of that, over the next decade or two, we're going to see an incremental increase in additional demand coming from this sort of new sector, if you will. If you go to the next slide, Knox, slide 7, and again, when we're talking electrification, don't just think EVs. It's an easy trap to fall into, especially when it comes to copper. In the case of copper, it's just basically electrification, period. It's copper wires that we use to get the electricity and move it around with. So anything from solar panels to wind farms to the cars themselves to big, stationary battery storage, all that stuff is going to require a heck of a lot of copper going forward. If you go to the next one there, Knox, number 8. And so what is the bottom line in terms of what does this actually mean for copper going forward? And the thing to realize is right now the copper market is around 23 to 24 million tons a year of supply and demand. And when we look at the incremental new copper demand coming out of the whole electrification narrative, it's on the order of 2 to 4 million tons a year of additional copper that we're going to need to source. So it's around a 10 to 15% increase above sort of base load demand, if you will. And again, that's going to come on over the next 10 to 15 years. And again, when you think back to that first slide I showed you, the bar chart with just basics mine supply rolling over and call it 2024, 2025, and then layer on top of that this new incremental demand coming on in sort of the same time frame over the next decade or so. Again, something really has to give, and I think it's going to have to start with the copper price itself to incentivize new developments. And even then, again, that sort of next generation, that big long list I showed you, a lot of those projects, some of them are into sort of detailed engineering and permitting, but a lot of them are well shy of that, and you're probably realistically facing 7, 8 to 10 years of timeline before they actually ever see any copper coming out of the ground. And maybe on the next slide, slide number 9, just want to touch base, thinking about sort of electrification, the green narrative, and just something we're seeing a transition in the market in terms of what makes a good project these days. And when I think about the sort of old trifecta, old sort of checklist of what you really wanted in a project, economics were important and are still very important. But I think in this new world that we're entering, we're seeing, at Cormark, when we talk to institutional clients, one thing we're seeing is a lot more emphasis on, projects that are favorably located. So in ESG favorable jurisdictions, projects that have optionality on a low carbon footprint or a green narrative to sort of, again, support sort of ESG practices from an environmental point of view. And then strategic importance. So not just buying a copper stock for the sake of having exposure to a pound of copper, but having exposure to a greater underlying theme like EVs or electrification, for example. So I think, when you think about investment opportunities, key questions going forward are, A, is it in a favorable jurisdiction? B, is there an argument, or is the company doing anything to demonstrate sort of environmentally favorable production of the specific metal? And C, strategic importance, and namely big projects that can offer long-term supply certainty. One thing we're really seeing now is groups like Tesla, for example, or end users really start to move upstream towards the mine side of the equation, because it's pretty clear that they're quite scared that there's just simply not enough near to medium term metal out there to meet their business plans in terms of building batteries and building cars and building electrification, if you will. And so to them, cost is almost secondary. It's just securing long-term supply certainty is job number one for them. And don't forget, it's the cars themselves or the batteries or electrification where they actually make their profit anyways, not the actual pound of copper per se. So, kind of the new world where location trumps grade and carbon footprint trumps cost, I think are some key takeaway themes. And then let's finish off with one last slide number 10. Just to sort of, emphasize that point. This is just a recent survey looking at sort of non-specialist institutional investors and what they're looking for when they look at, mining stocks. And again, you can see top of the list there is, exposure to sort of key macro themes, in this case, the battery narrative or electrification. And then number third on the list, which jumps out at me as well, is again that importance on ESG favorable jurisdictions. It's becoming more and more a non-starter for projects that are in tough locations around the world to get any institutional interest these days. So even if you have the A team that's demonstrated, the ability to operate and have success in challenging parts of the world, a lot of the institutions these days are just saying no right off the bat to those. So one interesting thing about, the panel we have today with, Trilogy, Western Copper, and Kodiak, again, you kind of check all the check boxes I mentioned there with, again, favorable location, big scale projects that can, offer supply certainty over the longer term. And again, just carbon friendly footprints, whether it's access to grid power or other key factors that I'm sure the companies will touch on. So with that, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you very much for that insight, Stefan. We'll certainly revisit this as we go along here. So right now we're getting to the question period of our webinar. The questions are starting to come in. I just thought I'd give it another minute or so just to allow people to ask their questions. But Stefan, are you there still? Can we hear you?
I'm here, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Because I thought this first question, it pertains to you. And it might not be fair right off the top of your head, but the speaker projects a 3.5% annual increase in the future copper demand. What is the rate of annual increase in the copper consumption in the last 10 years?
Well, I'd have to look back, but I mean, the current projections, when you look at it, are anywhere from 2 to 4%, right? Obviously, the bearish being the 2% and the bullish being 4 to even 5%. And I think you can get towards that more bullish end of things. Like that one picture I showed you is a bit of a cartoon. You'll see a similar looking graph all over the internet, but the actual, whether it's 2% or 4%, depends on whose data set you're looking at. But I think there's an argument that as we move a little bit further out, the idea that it could be, closer to the 4% end of that, with the EV narrative coming on stream as it sort of ramps up over the next decade, like I kind of showed in some of those graphs. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers the question. I can look back and find out what the exact number is over history, but it has been growing fairly steadily at anywhere.
I think that's a fair answer, given that we're putting you on the spot here. So the second question is directed to Western Copper and Gold. As I've understood it, WRN is in the beginning stages of permitting. Do you think this affects the company's ability to find a buyer/partner? And is the company at the moment actively looking for a buyer/partner?
Well, I'll work that in reverse, and I guess I think every junior mining company is always looking for a buyer/partner, and certainly a project of this magnitude, and from the feasibility study in 2013, the capital cost was 2.5 billion, and we'll see with the updated PEA what it comes in at, but it's in that order of magnitude. So I've been pretty public in saying that the best way I think for this project to go forward is with a partner or in the hands of a major. In terms of where we are in the process, I don't think that has any impact on those discussions. We have a number of discussions underway and have had in the past, and I think that what's exciting for me is that when copper hits $4 consistently, and back to what Steph was talking about with just not a lot of good projects out there, suddenly the majors become buyers of copper projects, and we now have those things in place. And so, certainly I think, at least from my experience, I'm seeing a lot more interest.
Thank you. And Tony, how might you answer that question without giving away trade secrets, or how are you seeing the market?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear Paul speak about having a partner, and we're very fortunate that we have South 32 as a partner in the project. And effectively, we believe South 32 is already done. The passover that Teck is doing with respect to Kodiak, for example, they've come in, they've done their due diligence as part of a process. They made a staged investment of $30 million in exploration, and then they put their money on the table to earn a 50% in the district by putting $140 million. And then we also have the Nano partnership, which is really going to be key, and I think it's a key for all of the companies represented here in terms of having strong relationships with the native communities and having that. So we feel like we're in a really good position. We're starting the permitting process this year. That sort of kicks us off into making an investment decision, which would come at the end of a permitting point of view. And our objective is to add value through the drill bit, like Claudia was talking about. And we didn't have a drill campaign last year. We're going to have one this year. We already know we have high grade. We just want to find more of it and extend mine life at Arctic and see what bornite really is and how it ties into Arctic. So that's what we're focused and excited about.
Right. And Claudia, Teck's a big partner with Kodiak. Why do you think they came in so early in the game, relatively speaking?
Well, they came in after just 4 holes at the gate zone. That's obviously very early, and it's fantastic to have them as a partner. They know the area intimately. Their big Highland Valley copper moly mine is just 50 kilometers to our north. And what I think they liked is simply the size potential. They are a big company. They wouldn't be interested in a small project. They looked at the footprint that we have at NPD, and they could see this to have the potential to be a big mine. That's what got them interested. And obviously the grades we drilled with our first couple of drill holes were very exciting. We were fortunate to hit a nice high-grade zone right away, which has since already shown quite some size. And so that's an exciting start. And I feel very fortunate to have gained Teck as a partner. They have been very supportive and are a great partner to have in the boat.
Great, thank you. This next question is to the panel, and maybe Tony, you could be the first to answer this one. Do we think North America can realistically compete with South America on copper?
Wow, I think so. I mean, North America, we're very fortunate. We've got great jurisdictions, whether you're in Alaska, Yukon, BC. There's a strong rule of law. There's high environmental standards, but that's the way it has to be. And then we're working very closely with the communities, and I think all of us are in the same position in terms of doing that. And I think the other major consideration is, as we talk about EV and electrification of a grid and infrastructure, is really important to have your own source of metals. So I think whether Canada or US, there's going to be a desire to have Canadian sourced or American sourced copper, cobalt, and these very strategic metals that are going to be necessary for electrification of a grid. So I think we can be absolutely extremely competitive. And, I feel we have a huge advantage in terms of being in the great state of Alaska or being in British Columbia or Yukon. I think we're very fortunate to be operating in these jurisdictions.
Paul, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
Well, Tony, I think Tony did a great job answering it. But just to reiterate a couple points, I mean, absolutely competitive. And, the thing that I would point out is that a lot of South America, particularly Chile and Peru, has seen a lot of exploration activity. I mean, there's been a lot of money poured into that area. Whereas, where are you seeing big discoveries here? Well, these three here. I mean, we're in Alaska, Yukon, underexplored areas, and even British Columbia, which is continuing to show promise with Kodiak. So, I mean, it's sort of, there's been a lot of exploration in South America previous, and now there's a bit of a shift in a lot of great discoveries coming out of North America. Thank you.
Actually, wanted to talk about ESG, which is environmental, sustainability, and governance. You had a slide on that, Paul. So maybe I'll start with Claudia on this. ESG, and Stefan alluded to this, that the matrix are really kind of pushing away from IRR and economies of scale and really emphasizing ESG moving forward. It's becoming an absolutely critical thing. So maybe discuss your philosophy about ESG and what are some of the things that you're doing to instill it.
Sure. Well, ESG is crucially important at any stage of an exploration or mining project. There are many mines or would-be mines in the past that never came into being because of local oppositions, because the operators just didn't do the ESG side well. And for me, ESG is just that most important of all. I would put that the highest priority. We work already at this early stage very closely with First Nations group before we even put a spade to the ground or disturb ground in any way. We would consult and get a heritage survey done. We're also looking into hiring First Nation into the project team as we are growing the project team. And we've started, even though we're only a couple of holes in, with environmental baseline work and to make sure we really cover the environmental side as well. So yeah, I think ESG is just crucially important. Stefan highlighted that as well. And as a company in today's time, not paying attention to ESG is just not right.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've got all three jurisdictions here with the Yukon and Alaska and BC. Maybe Tony, in Alaska, what is your philosophy? What are some of the programs that you have in place to, on the ESG side?
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate. My predecessor, Rick Van Nieuwenhuis, did a great job of working with the Northwest Arctic Bureau and NANA and the communities. And I mentioned that NANA is our partner in the district. So they actually are either going to be an economic partner in any of the mines that are developed in terms of direct ownership interest, if that's the path they take, or they can have a net profit interest of 15%. So it's a great situation for them in the sense that they're going to economically benefit from the development of the mines directly from the development of the mines. And then the other benefit will be obviously through employment and procurement opportunities. But the key for us is really going to be working very much with the Native communities, the shareholders of NANA, and making sure that we're respectful of their subsistent hunting and fishing, particularly as we look at the development of a road in the district. That's going to be a key, and a lot of work has been done, a lot of outreach has been done, and we, like the other companies, obviously have a lot of Aboriginal or Native employees, and we'll be looking to put training programs in place once we move these projects forward. So those are going to be the key steps. It's very much the interface with NANA, Northwest Arctic Bureau, and the state in terms of advancing the project. And then lastly, in terms of environmental, we're planning to start the permitting process this year. A big part of our focus is really on water management and tailings management, and we want to make sure we get those areas down pat before we start the permitting process. So we're effectively revisiting the work that was done in the Trilogy feasibility study in terms of determining the path forward in both of those areas, which are going to be key from a permitting point of view.
Great. Thank you. And Paul, anything you'd like to add, in the Yukon that you haven't already touched on?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that, particularly in Western Canada and northern communities such as Alaska and the Yukon, I mean, working with Indigenous groups and the First Nations is basically built into what you do. I mean, you just don't advance your projects unless you have those good relationships. And as an illustrative example, we, for our tailings facility, I mean, we actually went through a process that took us 18 months where we worked with the impacted First Nations and the regulator, looking at all the options. We started off with 385 options on tailings and mine waste and ended up with one. And that took a year and a half, which was, some valuable time. But if you don't take those steps, if you don't take the time that it takes to make sure that everyone understands your project, it's not going to go forward. You're going to get opposition. So I think, that's what we do. That's what all the companies here that you're talking to do.
Excellent. Nice, well-rounded answers. Thanks. So finally, I guess, as we're getting near the end of this, I guess people want to know, why would they want to look at your stock right now? What are some of the catalysts moving forward? So I'll start with you, Claudia. What are some of the catalysts that investors can look at with Kodiak Copper?
Well, the answer for Kodiak is easy. It's drill results. We are drilling as we speak. First results will come in later in spring, early summer. And as we are ramping up our drill program and adding drill rigs, the news will accelerate through the rest of the year. So lots more drill results, and keep your fingers crossed for more high-grade results and long intercepts.
And Paul, anything in the near future that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're all excited internally because, you know, this PEA, which is, you know, Q2, which, you know, we're now in, so pretty imminent. And, you know, I talked to our VP of engineering last week, and things are progressing, you know, on schedule. And, you know, this will be, the first economic study since 2013. It'll have a new resource. It'll have the new tailings facility that I just referred to that was developed with the First Nations, and a bunch of other things. So that'll be excited, and then an full updated feasibility study by the end of the year.
Thank you. And Tony, for you?
Yeah, it was on my slide, but I think the biggest thing that we're focused on is drilling this year. We didn't have a field season last year. We're going to have 14,600 meters, $27 million program. It's really about finding more high grade, connecting bornite to Arctic. We brought in a consultant, Dr. David Broughton. David and I worked together at Ivanhoe. He was a co-discoverer of Kamoa-Kakula, and this is right up his sweet spot in terms of Kapushi type deposit at bornite. So we want to see how that connects. I think there's lots of opportunity there. So that's a story. And, you know, like others have pointed out, we think from a share price point of view, the developers really haven't seen an uptick in their share prices, even though we've seen some upward movement. A lot of the focus has been on operating development companies. So we think this is still a very positive time to come into the story.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that's probably, we still have some more questions, but we will answer these directly for people because not all these questions are relevant to everyone in the audience. So with any questions that we have that haven't been answered now, we will respond to them via email. And of course, we have everybody's contact information on this slide, or you can contact Six after the webinar. But thank you all, and Stefan, thank you for joining us when you could, and appreciate your insights in the macro market. So with that,
Great, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks. So with that, we will sign off, and thank you everyone for listening.